Welcome back to my Unity tutorial for making an FPS. In this video, we're going to start setting up a rocket launcher type of weapon that will shoot little discs that explode and then apply a bit of a force effect to things around them. In the following video, we're going to upgrade it to also be able to shoot it as a grenade. So let's get started. So we want to start by starting to just kind of either create a script from scratch, or I think it would probably be better to modify the existing blaster script, because that's most like the script that we're going to want to build. So we are going to start by making a duplicate of this script. So single left click on the weapon blaster script and then hit Control D for duplicate. You'll get this error down here on the bottom because when we duplicated it, we have two copies of the class weapon blaster. We're going to fix that in a second, so it's not really a huge issue. So we're going to hit F2 to rename, and rename this to weapon underscore launcher. And then we're going to double click that. So we need to rename the class because there already is a definition for weapon blaster. So we'll rename it to weapon launcher. And we'll go through and tweak some of the settings here. So time in between attacks, it's a rocket launcher, so it's a pretty powerful weapon. So we'll drop that to 0.8. Damage of the projectile, this will play a role when we do enemies. We could set it to 50 for now, so that'll do some kind of area effect, 50 damage with drop off from distance. The speed of the projectile, well, let's rename this the rocket and grenade. The speed of, this is specifically the rocket. And we could also break this up into two separate headers for rocket stats and grenade stats, but there's not enough, I think, to make it warranted. We could maybe make this a little bit faster than the blaster, or we can make it slower depending on what you think would be a balanced setting. I'll bump it up to 30. This weapon will not have aim down sights, and it will not have charging. So we're going to take out the stuff related to aim down sights and related to charging. While we're here, we probably should also adjust some of the settings for how strong the grenade mode is. So I'm going to create a variable here, public float grenade force, and we'll call that 20. This is going to be the power at which the grenade comes out of this launcher. And grenade angle. How much of a rotation is this grenade going to have when it gets launched? And I'm going to rename projectile speed to rocket speed because that's now specifically the rocket. And I'm going to give the grenade tooltip. And this is technically the initial speed of the grenade. And then the initial angle. I guess technically these are floats, so we can do them with decimals like that. Okay, so that is the update to our weapon stats. The related prefabs, I'll set a different prefab for the rocket, and, well, we do need different prefabs for the rocket and for the grenade, because they do have different behaviors. So even though it'll be the same graphic, it'll be that disk, I do want to have different prefabs for them. Crosshair will still stay there, and then we could also have different sounds for each thing. So I'll have a sound for the rocket, and a sound for the grenade. Now, I don't actually have different sound effects in this project for those, but if you wanted to import your own sounds, you would be able to swap out the sounds. So that the rocket could have maybe more of a whoosh and the grenade could have more of a chunk. And then that way, like, you could tell what's being shot from the sounds alone. Spawn point will still need to be here. Now, muzzle flash, muzzle light, and the particles, I'm going to redo the code so these could possibly be null. I'm not going to set one, but if you wanted to, you could. And so I'm not going to, but I'm going to adapt the code to be able to support both. As far as the position goes, we don't need an aim down. Well, we don't need an aim down sights position. And I am going to set this position to be slightly further away, maybe 0.60. There are no pistons, so we're going to take that out. There is a cooldown, there is an audio source, but none of these other ones will be used. So we're going to delete those. All right, so that's it for the instance variables. Now, we could save this. It's still not going to work because, as you can see over here, we still have a lot of errors to fix. But we'll run through the methods and we'll clean up the methods as we go. So we don't need any of that. We just need the binding of the audio source. And then in update, we don't need the aim down sights. We don't need the zooming from aiming down sights, and we don't need the stuff about charging. So update is now much simpler. Play audio is fine. Stop audio is fine. Now, the muzzle flash, I do want to expand this to be if muzzle flash is not equal to null. And then that way it will work for either. And this will be muzzle light. That way, if you don't set these, it will work just as well as if you did choose to set these. Because I'm not going to set them, but if you wanted to put some kind of like smoke effect, you could put some kind of smoke effect on this. So now these are all optional. Really should put a tooltip that says that these are optionally defined. All right, so now we're in Fire 1. So Fire 1 will eventually have kind of the meat of my code, but for now, I'm going to take out what's there. And I will replace it with what is in Fire 1 up, because this is the code for launching that projectile after we charged it. So I'm just going to cut all of this out of Fire 1 up and place it into Fire 1. Take out the audio thing, re-swap the prefab to a rocket. Modified speed, well, we don't really need these, so we could just delete that. Instead of calling this temporary prefab laser, I want to rename it to rocket. And then instead of modified speed, it was rocket speed, and it was just damage, I believe. Play audio. This would be sound rocket. And we don't need the charge related stuff. So this will, I mean, we probably still need to go through and maybe make a few tweaks to this. But this will provide at least a decent core for us to launch our rockets with. So we're going to take out the aim down sights. We're going to take out the Fire 2. In the next video, we'll return to do the grenade launcher. So I'm going to leave Fire 2 blank for now. But that will eventually be the grenade launcher stuff. And then get position no longer needs to lerp because we only have the one position. So we're just going to return weapon position here. Now all of the changes are complete. We can hit save and we can begin attaching this script to the rocket launcher. So we conveniently have that open. So if you don't have it open, remember it's in the FPS weapons, prefabs weapons, and then double click on the prefab. So we can go into the prefab editor. And I want to attach my script. So that is found in scripts weapons. And now it is attached. I could set up some of my variables here while I'm here. I do have a rocket prefab. That is found in the weapon FPS prefabs projectiles. I have this disk, which doesn't really have any code, but we can still put it there. The crosshair would be found inside of FPS weapons art, textures, UI, and I'm going to use the drop crosshair. The sound will be found in audio, sound effects, weapons. Oops. And there is launcher release, and I'm going to use launcher release for both sound effects. Spawn point will be the gun muzzle. And I wasn't going to set up any of the other things. I wasn't going to use a muzzle flash, a muzzle light, or a muzzle particle. But you could. You could have like a little bit of smoke emit from the weapon when it shoots, and that would look pretty cool. Okay, so that's set up. And now we can actually, we should be able to play test it. And that means we can switch to it. And we can switch off of it because it's no longer script crashing. And if I hit left click, you can see that it creates a disk, and then we get a null reference exception, and we'll have to look up what that's actually caused by. Probably because there's no script on it when it's trying to find the script. The script is non-existent, and so it's crashing at that point before it it can set speed or anything. So okay, I mean that's a good start. So if we want to figure out where this error is going, if we double click it, yeah, it's the fact that this prefab doesn't have the projectile script attached to it yet, so we will need to fix that. So that leads us to our second part. Which is making a script for that disk. So we're going to go into the scripts projectiles, and I'm going to just duplicate the player blasters. I'm going to start with that and tweak it so that it can have explosions, and then we're going to import an explosion to put on it. So I hit Control D to duplicate, which pops open Visual Studio for some reason. Hit F2 to rename this. And so make sure that this is the one that says Blaster 1. And I'm going to rename this to Player Rocket. And then push Enter. Verify that the name did actually stick. And now double click it to open it up in the editor. So it is no longer Player Blaster. It is Player Rocket. And we need to go through and change a couple of things here. So this isn't really I guess it is a particle object that spawns when the rocket is destroyed. So it's going to be the explosion effect, but it's still kind of the same thing. The weapon data for owner, speed, damage. Now we do have some for rocket. And so for this, I want to have an area of effect. So the area effect, we'll set it to 3 for now, but we can always turn on a gizmo to see what that looks like and then decide if we want to keep that. And then we want an explosion force. And this is how powerful of an explosion that it's going to create. All these numbers tend to be ridiculous, so we're just going to go with 15 for now. And then an explosion lifts. And this is how much lift it gives when it explodes. So I do want to kind of initialize my constructor a little bit. So this constructor here, just for the sake of assigning values. So the problem is the initialize that we did was part of the, I was going to say abstract class, but part of the interface. And so the interface for our projectiles is only expecting these 3 inputs. And so not everything is going to need to have an area effect. So that's why we have these extra ones. So we could consider, when we initialize this, to actually create another one that takes in things like area of effect and the explosion force. Lift I'll leave at 1 because that tends to not need to be changed. And now I can at least reference these. So I could call this kind of explicitly on the rocket prefab. And I know that is breaking a little bit of the universality of, or the modularness of how we set this up, but it'll make sense when we do it. Now, I don't plan on doing a trigger for this. I'm going to just leave it as a collider. So I'll just do on collision enter. And then that means instead of a collider here, this is going to be a collision. And I'm going to switch this to hits. So on collision enter, and then it's going to trigger a hit. And then that will launch impact. Impact will spawn my explosion effect. And then eventually delete that. And we can just call this explosion if we want. Don't think it's going to need to be rotated. Could. All right. So this seems sufficient. So if we hit play, basically it'll probably break when it's supposed to explode, so it'll just stick around forever. And inside the launcher, we can even specify things such as the area of effect. So we might want to go add that. And then the amount of force that the explosion will apply, so that we can actually reference these as the inputs to the settings. So I'm going to specify area of effect and then explosion force. Now notice that this is unhappy, even though we know that that method exists. That's because it's not part of the interface projectile anymore. This is now specific to only the rocket launcher. So we do have to be kind of careful about that, that running this method will only apply to the rocket. So we can get that script specifically so we can run this method. And honestly, I use the interface just to make it easier to spawn things kind of quickly. All right, so we can hit save on that. We can go back to Unity and see what happens. Now, we don't have an explosion. And so it's going to probably crash when it hits something. Or actually, it's just probably mad that there's no rigid body on it. Or no script. Both. Okay. So let's go to our projectile and let's give it a component physics. We could do a mesh collider. Mesh collider would be fine. Tell it to be convex. And then you can verify that if you turn on gizmos, that it does have the collider there. And then also we need rigid body, so we'll add a component rigid body. Honestly, the mass of this thing's probably pretty small, so I'll just do 0.5. We don't want it to be initially affected by gravity. We will use interpolate, and we'll use continuous detection. And I want to exclude the player layer so that the player won't accidentally set off their own explosive. Which kind of leads to the thought of whether or not you want to put this on the player layer as well. I don't know. I don't think you really would need to. And then we need to attach the script. So that'll be in our scripts projectiles, and we want to take the player rocket script and attach it onto here. We don't have our hit effect prefab, so it is going to crash. I mean, if we wanted to, just for the sake of not crashing, just give it the old blaster spark. That way we can then load an explosion in it, and at least it won't crash for now. So we can hit play. And it shoots. I mean, it gives us a very unsatisfying blaster spark when it hits something. But we basically have a functional rocket launcher so far. So we still need to apply force to it, because if I jump back to the scene real quick, and let's say I want to put some, some boxes in here. So if I just insert some cubes, like some barrels, or I guess crates, if you think about FPSs, how there's always just random crates just chilling everywhere. And give this crate a box collider, give this crate a rigid body, and set the rigid body to something a little bit chunky like 4. And then just duplicate it. And so we have a little stack of boxes. What we'll notice is the rocket itself does kind of push it because it was a solid object, but it doesn't give it an explosion. It doesn't give us a satisfying, like, push these blocks everywhere. And that's what we really want. So let's give it an explosion graphic first, and then go back through and modify the code so we can get a true explosion out of this. So I'm going to import Unity's old particle pack with this. And so let me see if I can go find that real quick on the asset store. So I'll link it in the video description, but if you were to go to Unity's asset store and search for particle, if I can spell particle pack, Unity Technologies has kind of an old one, and you could actually just load this up directly. You could just go to this particle pack here and add this to your account. Now, the problem with this is we're currently in Universal Render Pipeline, and it's not compatible, but we can make it compatible. I'll walk you through some very quick fixes for this. It's not perfect, and I'm not nowhere near an expert on Universal Render Pipeline, but we can get it to work. So if you want to add this to your assets and download this and import this, I'm about to do the same. So I've already pulled it as an external package. So I've got my particle pack right here. Now, I don't need the full, so yes, I do want to upgrade the things that it wants to upgrade. I don't need the full package. I just want the particles. Because when I import this, it's going to also want to load sample scenes and some texture mesh stuff. And I don't really need all of that. So I'm going to minimize a couple of these folders. Yes, I want the particle pack part. I want all of these like explosions and fires. But I don't want the scene. I don't need the demo scene. I don't need the stuff that was part of the demo scene. I don't need the Text Mesh Pro stuff. And I don't really need the tutorial info. Debatable if I need the README. Don't really need it. So I just want the effect examples. And then hit import. And then that's going to show up. That's going to show up down towards the bottom under Unity Technologies, Particle Pack, Effect Examples. The ones I mostly use are the fire and explosion. And if we jump to prefabs, if it loads the whatchamacallit, the preview, we could see which ones will actually function. But if we want to see which ones are going to function, we could just plop a few of these inside the world. So, for example, large flames still seems fine. And, you know, that would look perfectly okay inside of a game. Keep in mind, it looked a little bit different because I had it selected. But insofar as just flames, well, it looks pretty good. But if I like the ones that I really want, such as either the small explosion or the tiny explosion, notice that the explosion has these pink squares around it. So what's happening is the materials, you can see some of these have failed to transfer over to the universal render pipeline. Some of them did, but not all of them. And so for this one, it's actually the smoke. So if you click on the smoke, essentially what's happened is this particle, the settings for this are no longer supported. So if you just go through and pick a new particle, and then like choose something like standard unlit, you can see that we're actually reasonably back in business. You can adjust this. If you think the smoke is too dark, use additive, and that makes it more kind of white. But in this case, I think the black smoke makes more sense. But again, your mileage may vary. So that's not always the correct fix for all of these. Like, that's not going to fix the plasma explosion because that's a specular shader. And so there really wasn't a good, solid, like, new version of that. So you can do some Googling, ask some AIs if you want to try to resurrect as much of this particle pack as you can, or you could see if there's some kind of tutorial. I really didn't look. I just got the explosion working and I was happy. So now that it's fixed, we can use that explosion as part of, if I can find it again. We can use that as part of my projectile. So that's under FPS Weapons Prefab, Projectiles, and then Projectile Disk. So with that selected, I can then, on the script here, instead of using the blaster spark, I could assign something like small explosion or tiny explosion. And then now whenever I play and I shoot my disk, I now get a reasonably satisfying explosion that comes with it. Now the small explosion is a little bit smaller if you prefer that, but now we've got an explosion to go with us. So the very final thing we'll do, and this is a pretty quick piece, is to apply a tiny bit of force to all of the rigid body enabled things near the explosion. Now, depending on how glitchy this behaves with like enemies, we might have to tweak this if it's a little too much. But if we go into the projectile for the player rocket, right before we spawn the explosion, we can go through and start applying the force. All right, so let's do that. So we can apply a force to everything within the area of effect. So first up, we need to, because we use this a couple times, we'll just say explosion position equals transform dot position, just to make our lives easier. So we get all the colliders within range. This is going to return an array, not an array list, just a regular old array, usually called colliders. And we use what's called a physics overlap sphere. If I can spell it. And the overlap sphere gets everything within the area effects. So every collider, and what we can do is we'll draw that as a wireframe so that we can also see how big is this area of effects applying. So similar to how we did it with the shotgun, we could just spew out a debug dot. Oh, I guess I need to do that under gizmos. All right, so we'll draw a wire sphere on that. I guess that'll be fine. And then we need to, so we've, well, you know, we'll move that. Let's move this a little bit. So we want to loop through all the colliders now. So we got all the colliders, and then we want to go through and apply the force to anything that has a rigid body. So we'll use a for each loop here. And we're going to check for the rigid body. So we're going to get the component of, we're going to try to get the rigid body component of the thing that we hit. And then if it's not equal to null, so if hit body is not equal to null, so if it has a rigid body, we can then do the add explosion force, which will automatically kind of like taper off the impact of the explosion. So then we put explosion position, then the radius. If we wanted to apply any upwards motion, I think it's called explosion lift. And then the force type, which I believe impulse makes the most sense here. So we can hit save, and we should be able to test this. So when we shoot the rocket, it should now send these crates pretty much straight up into orbit, or it'll just crash. Yeah, I didn't like my draw gizmos. So what we could do with that, we'll revisit that in the next video, because that'll take like a few seconds. So we'll do that at the start of the next video. So take that out and hit save on this. So we shoot the crates, and we should be getting a little bit more of an impact. So let's up some of the power involved in this. So let's go to this prefab. Now, keep in mind, changing the prefab actually isn't going to do it. That's going to be something we want to change inside the weapon itself. So we're going to go to the weapon prefab, and then change the explosion force off of 10. Let's just make it something ridiculous like 200. Well, that is definitely weird. I guess the question is, did I put rigid bodies? Oh. Why do they have 2 box colliders? Well, we're not really getting the explosion, but we'll play with that in the next video. So, let's put some sound effects on this. Yeah, my cat's not happy that that's not working either. So we'll put some sound effects on this, and then we will fix that. So the very final thing we want to do is to just go to the explosion prefab. And I'm using small explosions, so I'll do it here. I'm just going to add a audio component, an audio source, and I'm going to attach from the FPS weapons audio the launcher explosion. So let's get that back up. Let's get my sound effect. And I'm going to drag launcher explosion into the audio clip. Now, since it's using play on awake, we don't actually have to run a script to run this sound. It should automatically play that sound when this thing spawns, and it will get deleted. It doesn't loop anyway, so now we have a sound effect. So we will stop here. I'll upload a really short video about fixing the force of this, and then we will explore a grenade launcher mode of the weapon. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the quick fix. All right, welcome back for the fix for the particle or the rocket launcher effect. So the issue with this was actually just a simple, not me not paying attention. We want to add the explosion force to hit body, not RB. So if we do that and hit save, that will fix the problems that we were having. So it is going to launch these a little bit far because I think we set the explosion force to like 100. And so it kind of pushes them rather extremely. So you might want to bump that down a little bit. So 100 is or 200 is even a bit much, maybe like 50. And leave it there. The other thing that I wanted to do was also to make sure that the disc doesn't detonate on the player. And so if you pull up the prefab for the projectile disc, we want to make sure that we did exclude the player layer on that so that it doesn't impact on the player. And so that should fix the problem that we were having. And then in the next full video, we'll go through and make a right-click grenade launcher effect for this weapon. So thank you for watching.